Started. Okay. Welcome to today's version of Women Owning Woodlands. Today we're going to talk about growing mushrooms using log as your substrate for growing these mushrooms. So we'll talk just a little bit about two kinds of mushrooms. And really today I'm going to talk about the inoculation process. So right now is a good time to kind of be thinking about inoculating logs, because it's actually a really enjoyable process to do during the dormant season. And then it provides a lot of, good stuff for next growing season. So, and it's much more enjoyable to cut wood coming up as soon as we start to cool off and those ticks start to slow down in the wood some. So if you're new with us today, Women Owning Woodland is a program that's being developed to provide learning opportunities to women landowners and woodland enthusiasts. We organize field days, lunch and learns, and classes that are geared towards women, forest landowners, and woodland enthusiasts. Also a Facebook page to provide networking opportunities and a place to come with questions. So again, kind of all those things and above. Some upcoming events. So starting tomorrow, Dr. Stelzer, my educational director, and I will be offering Summer Woodland Steward webinar series. This is just a series of 3 webinars with covering understory and shrub trees is tomorrow night's presentation. The next Tuesdays is going to be over mass production for wildlife. And then the final one of that is going to be all about cost share. Registration for that is open through the extension website if you're again looking for something to do on Tuesday nights for this end of August. We still have a couple spots left open for our Women Owning Woodland, Women Caring for the Land Field Day. That's going to be held up in Kirksville, Missouri on August 27th. That's a program that I do in conjunction with Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever. And again, it's kind of a collaboration of extension, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, and then also MDC is helping out on this one. And then just a reminder about our August Lunch and Learns. We have 2 more after today for August, and then I will put together September's. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 different species of mushrooms, and both of these mushrooms are going to be cultivated ones. So we actually inoculate a very specific spawn so we know exactly which mushrooms we're going to get. Shiitakes are not native to Missouri, but we do not worry about them becoming invasive because they actually are a pretty weak mushroom and fungi, and they don't compete well with our native mushrooms or fungi. So they're great for cultivation, just kind of like a tomato plant or a pepper plant. They do really well where we put them, but they do not generally leave where we put them just because of they don't compete well with our natives. Shiitakes have been gathered off phone logs for centuries in Asia, so they're one of the most popular mushrooms in Asia. You've probably tasted them in some type of Asian cuisine. They're pretty tasty by themselves or mixed in with other things. The name shiitake actually means oak loving. So they're cultivated using wood as a substrate. That's what they feed on. That's what they need to grow. There's 2 viable methods, and today we're going to talk about natural log cultivation. But there's also a method that's called synthetic or sawdust log cultivation. And you may have seen this. It's becoming a little bit more popular just kind of in our everyday life. At some of the big box stores, I've actually seen these kits, and it's essentially a box and it's packed full of sawdust that's already been inoculated with mushroom spawn. And then all you have to do is kind of put it in an environment, open up sides of this box so it has a place to grow out of, and then you can produce mushrooms that way. And this is not a bad way to cultivate mushrooms. It's just sometimes it's not very long lasting. So usually those only last a season, and those shiitakes are going to use up, or any mushroom is going to use up all that food source that's provided to them. and then you're gonna have to kind of start over with a new kit. But it is very space conscious and pretty easy to come by, and generally not that expensive. But today we're going to talk about the small scale natural log cultivation. So this is using actual natural logs that we would, find in our woods, or, off a log pile if we needed to find somewhere else to collect them. I know I have some homeowners, landowners who are like, I don't have a lot of land, I don't have a lot of trees. Where could I get logs? And so I'll put out there that Missouri Department of Conservation, they periodically have timber stand improvements and timber sales on their property. And they do allow people to, they call it a firewood permit, but they allow people to fill out a form, and then you can collect firewood on those TSIs or sales. And so you can use this method to find some natural logs if you're looking. Shiitake mushrooms, the sawdust spawn is what I'm going to talk about today. There's a couple other ways to inoculate. This is probably the most popular and just about the easiest to do. So this is sawdust that has been inoculated with mycelium. And so that's all that white that is growing. This is essentially the roots of the mushroom. So that's already been kind of developing and feeding on that sawdust. And then this, again, is perfect. It's very cost effective. It is sensitive to drying out. So we want to keep it moist throughout the inoculation process. It's also something, so I buy these bags. You can buy like a 2.5 pound bag or a 5 pound bag of what we call inoculant or spawn. And you can keep this in the fridge. And it can last from about 6 to 9 months before having to either use it or replace it. That's about the time it takes to kind of eat up all the nutrients that are in that sawdust. But again, it can stay in your fridge for quite some time. You just want to make sure it's kept moist. And when thinking about logs for this, it's best to cut trees while dormant, so November to March, but other times of year will work. The least favored months to cut trees specifically for shiitake mushrooms is going to be April to May. And this is because in the spring, trees tend to put up a lot of, they have kind of some natural antifungal components to them, and they will put off more of those in the spring when all the sap is running up the tree. So this is the least favored time to cut trees for shiitake mushrooms. So right now is okay. You just want to make sure you let it age for a little bit and that you keep it moist. So I'd say that we are in that dry time of year, but we really haven't seen that yet in Missouri this year. But we want to make sure the logs stay moist because that's really important for the mycelium to take root and to stay alive. So they have to get their moisture from the log that they're in. So it's a good time to cut trees now this fall, all winter long. You can cut trees for this and go through this inoculation process. When we cut the trees, no matter what time of year we cut them, it is good to let the wood age for at least 2 weeks. And we can age it for up to 10 weeks or so. We don't want to let it age too long because if it sits, other fungi will find it and make their home there. And once kind of our native fungus have made their way into that tree or that log, they're going to compete with our shiitakes, and our shiitakes are going to lose. So we want to, that's kind of the window of cutting trees and inoculation. We do let it age for 2 weeks. So even when we're in the dormant season, there's still some of that antifungal chemical that's in there. And so after 2 weeks or so, it's been shown to break down and not, it won't kill our shiitake spawn before it completely takes hold. We want to select good logs. So for shiitakes, this can be sugar maple or white oak, or actually any species of oak. But sugar maple and white oak seem to be the most, the best logs for shiitakes. If there's areas where you've cut branches, so if a lot of times the logs are going to be from branches or further up in the crown that we use for this. And so if there are other branches that were cut off of that or trimmed away from it, you want to cover that when you wax your inoculation holes. And we want to make sure there's no like fungus that's already growing on these logs before we use them. I get asked the question a lot, like, what if my tree already died? Can I use it for this? Not for shiitakes very well. So again, if it's died, there's a good chance that another fungus has made its way into that tree and is already utilizing those nutrients, and our shiitakes aren't going to compete with it. We want to have logs that are about 4 inches to 6 inches in diameter. I always kind of end up on the smaller end of the spectrum because it's hard for me to maneuver 6-inch logs around because they, again, can get quite heavy, particularly oak. And then I usually cut my logs. So when I do classes, I bring shorter logs just for ease of transportation to a class. When I do logs at my own kind of shiitake farm, if you will, I do 48-inch logs, so 4 feet long. And I do quite a few at one time, and I kind of stack them up, and I'll show you pictures, but stack them up log cabin style. So that 4 inches is kind of nice for that because it's a little bit sturdier. But again, there's not really a set length that you have to do. It's just kind of ease of storage and where you're going to be putting them and keeping them. Again, longer and then bigger diameter logs, they're going to make shiitake mushrooms for a longer period of time. If weather is warm, dry, and windy for several weeks, you will want to water the logs for 1 to 2 hours a week and loosely cover them. So if you're storing them and waiting for inoculation, and even after inoculation, so once you've inoculated your logs, winters in Missouri, they can be fairly dry at times. And so even in the winter after you've inoculated, you'll want to water those logs and keep them moist. So the actual process for this, so there's the tools that you need are going to be a drill, or I have a special tool that's a drill bit that goes onto an angle grinder, and it makes perfectly measured out holes to go into the log. So either is okay. So again, this can kind of be almost as expensive as you want it to be or as cheap as you want it to be. So depending on the range. I have the bit that goes on an angle grinder. This is a just a simple handheld drill. About 9/16 is going to be the size of the drill bit that we use, or the angle grinding bit that we use. And this is going to make a hole. You'll want to drill down about a 1/2 inch into the log and make sure that you're through the bark. And then you can, so there's a tool over here you see. So he has his bag of spawn. This is called a thumb inoculator, and this can be ordered. It gets kind of patted into the spawn, and then it has like an injector that pushes that spawn into the log. So again, you can have that tool, or I've had quite a bit of success. There is a little bit more waste of spawn, but you can actually take up pieces of that sawdust spawn and kind of shove in those holes. So again, you can kind of be as expensive or high tech as you want, or as simple as you want it to be. So, and in that case, the biggest expense, using the drill and kind of finger pushing it in, the spawn will be one of your most expensive things that you purchase. So here is, and this works really well if you have, I do quite a few logs at a time, and I try to invite others over to help us. But if you're doing it individually, you might do all your drilling at one time and then all of your inoculation at one time. And then after inoculation, so each of these holes, it's kind of hard to see on this picture, but each of these holes is filled with sawdust spawn. And then we want to make, oh, here's a better picture. So again, thumb inoculator, pushing that spawn into those holes. Then we're going to cover each of these holes with wax. So I have a Goodwill crock pot that I purchased just for mushroom wax. So I use it for a lot of programs, but I think I spent like maybe $5 on it. And so the Gulf wax is the best choice, or cheese wax or beeswax. You want to just use a food safe wax, but you'll melt it, and then using a paintbrush or some type of dauber, you're going to put that wax to cover the holes where you've put the shiitake spawn into the log. And this is just there to kind of hold that in while it takes a hold of the mycelium, kind of start to make their way into the log and start to get a hold of it. And then we usually brush, it's hard to see in this picture, but we brush wax on either end of the log. And this is simply to help that log retain moisture. So we don't want these logs to dry out while the mycelium are establishing themselves, because that'll cause our shiitakes to die and we won't get any shiitakes out of our log. So that's important. So I actually have, like, I don't know, when I first started, I had 4 or 5 logs. I'd set them against a fence and thought they were fine. They were in kind of a wetter, shady part of the yard. But then upon inspection, they had been allowed to dry out too much. And I didn't get any shiitakes off of them. So it's, again, good to keep them moist. This is one way of storing shiitakes, so you can lean them against the house. Again, in a shaded environment where they can either be watered regularly or they'll get rain on a regular basis. These are kind of shiitake logs that are in their prime. You will see, like, they kind of take a slow start to start producing, and then they'll produce quite a few. And then as your logs age, they'll start to produce fewer and fewer. If you inoculate in the spring, you should move those directly into the woods or your laying yard where you're going to store them. If you're doing fall, winter, and you want to get shiitakes off of them sooner rather than later, you can put them into a warm, high humidity incubation room. Think, like a basement, or perhaps a garage that you want to have. So again, this is if you want shiitakes to start growing right away. You can leave them out through the winter, but expect that you would get mushrooms later than if you put them into that warm, humidified area. So there's kind of 2 choices for that. Good logs, good spawn, and moisture are pretty crucial for success with shiitakes. So that's just kind of what to think. You want a high quality log that's was from a healthy tree, not a diseased tree. Fresher spawn is usually better. I've had some mixed luck with some spawn that I've held on to for too long. And then, of course, that moisture. Your same logs will produce for 4 to 6 years. We want to definitely pay attention to keeping it wet during the first year, especially while those mycelium are establishing themselves. Small diameter logs will dry out faster than large diameter logs, so you want to, make sure those get watered first. After your first 4 months, you don't need to soak them as much. You can sprinkle them. But then after this time, you can do something called flushing your mushrooms. And so you can so you want to make sure they produce mushrooms before you do this method. But after you have a log that you know is a good shiitake mushroom producer, you can soak them in a stock tank, usually 24 hours, and then you pull them out of that stock tank and let them sit. And this will usually produce a flush of mushrooms all at one time, and you can, harvest them. So if you have an event that you want to make mushrooms for, or perhaps you're selling mushrooms at the farmer's market, you can kind of predict when you want to have mushrooms doing this method. But you don't want to do this right from the get-go, because it can stress out your shiitake mycelium, and it can cause that fungus to die completely. So you want to wait until it's been a little bit established, and you don't want to soak more than like 3 times a year, because again, this can kind of stress out your your shiitakes, and then they can die completely. Moldy green logs means too much moisture. You can check the logs to see if there are drying cracks. So if at any time there's like a crack large enough to put a dime in, you need to definitely add more water to those logs to make sure they have enough moisture. And then again, we're kind of coming up on winter. So if you inoculate now and put those logs out through the winter, you would expect to start seeing mushrooms once the daytime temperature is back in the 70s. So usually April, May is when you would see them if you do your inoculation now. Once you have mushrooms, and this is going to be the same for the oysters, which is the other species I'm going to talk about, but you want to make sure you cut the mushrooms when the cap's not fully extended. Cut with the knife instead of pulling them off. And this just allows you to make sure more mycelium kind of stays in the log, and we don't damage it too much. And this is a good rule of thumb with a lot of even our wild mushrooms, if you're a wild mushroom forager, because we leave more of that mycelium, then they're going to produce more. As with all mushrooms, we don't wash them until we're going to use them. A good place to store them is like a paper bag in the refrigerator. And then if you aren't going to use them, you can freeze them or you can dehydrate them for longer storage. So shiitake are fabulous. You can dehydrate them and then throw them in, different like soups or stir fries, and they rehydrate and they're delicious. The other species of inoculated mushrooms that are pretty easy to grow, so we do have some native oysters in Missouri, but we can also inoculate them. And so these do best if we cut trees during the dormant season. And just like with shiitakes, we want to use healthy living trees for this. Kind of the same rules. You want to let it sit for about 2 weeks so it does dissipate all of the antifungals. And then with oysters, so you can do exactly what we talked about with shiitakes. So that's called the drill and fill method. And you can set them up very similarly to how we did the shiitakes. Or you can use something called the totem method, which uses larger diameter logs, but in kind of a shorter, and we kind of stack them like a totem pole. So here's kind of a comparison. So this is the method that we used for the shiitakes, and you can use this for oysters. But then I'm going to talk on this one about the totem method. So this is where, so particularly if you had a tree, you cut down in your yard, and you wanted to use it to make mushrooms, but perhaps it's a little bit bulky for this kind of drill and fill method, you can try out this totem method. So, and for this, we're going to take a plastic garbage bag and we're going to fill the bottom of that with sawdust spawn. And then we're going to put the log on top, one of our logs on top of that. And then we're going to sprinkle more spawn on top. So it's kind of like a cake. So frosting on the bottom, cake or log, and then more frosting. And then we'll put another log on top of that, and then more spawn on top of that. And then we're going to cover the top log with newspaper or brown paper. So that's going to kind of help hold moisture into this. And then we're going to take our our plastic garbage bag or leaf bag, and we're going to close it up around the entire totem, just leaving a small opening for a little bit of air exchange. And this is going to hold a lot of moisture in there. And then we're going to set this aside somewhere with like a constant temperature of 60 to 80 degrees. So this is excellent to be in like perhaps a garage that's attached to a home, so it's kind of a little bit more temperature controlled, or in the basement is also a good place to put this. And then it's just going to like sit for 4 to 6 months. So right now is a great time to do these oyster inoculations because it can sit in a basement all winter long, and then come spring you can pull it out. Once that incubation or 4 to 6 months is done, you should see some white fuzzy growth. This is the mycelium. They've make their way in the logs. You can remove the logs from the bag and put them kind of still in that totem in a shady area where they are out of the wind, so they don't dry out as much, and then they can receive natural rainfall. And then shortly after you put them out and temperatures kind of, are above 70, I would expect that you would have oyster mushrooms. They're kind of tricky, so they'll fruit very quickly and spontaneously. So you want to make sure you check every few days on your oysters, because they can be there one day and then gone the next. So they're pretty fast. And then buying oyster spawn. So there's a couple different varieties of oyster, and it's really I haven't seen tasted much of a flavor difference. A lot of it has to do with color. So we have some that are like I think they call them blue oysters, but they're kind of a grayish color, and then some brown, and then white oysters. So again, just personal preference. And then I should have put in this presentation, when you're buying spawn, they'll give you some different choices. And so some different strains is what they call them. And so I use a lot of times the wide range strains. So sometimes they'll have a cool season and a warm season, and then the wide range. So the cool range, cool season, those are if you live in the northern states where you have a longer cold season. Those strains are more tolerant of cool weather than the others. And then the warm strains are going to be ones that are going to be kind of like in the southern states, where they do not have as long of a cold season. They have hotter weather, generally speaking, and a longer growing season. So here in Missouri, we of course have kind of all sorts of weather, it seems like, but the wide range strain is really adapted for cold weather, warm weather, and everything in between. And it does really well in Missouri with our very kind of varied climate that we have. So that's what I use as far as strains come. So if you're, on shopping for mushroom spawn, that's the strain that I've had the most success with. And I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to actually share a resource. And we generally, we don't send you to one specific place, but there is a company called Field and Forest. I'm going to share this real quick. Are you still seeing my PowerPoint? Are you seeing my Field and Forest?
Yes. Is it
the PowerPoint or mushrooms? Okay.
We're seeing, it says Field and Forest. Okay. We're seeing the mushrooms. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So they do sell all of the products I've talked about. There's several other places that sell products as well. And so I really just love to talk about their education pieces. So they have lots of information as far as video tutorials, growing on different mediums, and then the tool guide. So I just, again, they're a great resource if you want to start. These two resources I oftentimes put into worksheets for, and I'll zoom in on that so you can see it. But they have this wonderful there we go. Wonderful resource where it shows the mushroom variety, and then it gives the tree species that you might use for them. And so if it has a star, it's like superior. So here you can see, like for shiitake at the top, it has a blue star. So for oak, meaning that it's superior. But here's some of the other things, other species that you can use if you had them on hand. And they usually have success with them. And then here is oysters as well. And then there's quite a few other species that you can inoculate. So this is a great resource if you're looking at mushrooms. And then this resource kind of shows, worst, okay, best, and good times for inoculation of logs and when to harvest logs for this. And so you can see here, we're kind of coming up on that best part. So usually it says like early dormancy, which is when about 30% of leaves have changed color, and up to full color change to leaf off. So that's the best time to inoculate. It seems to be the most successful. So again, a good resource that they have as far as if you're thinking about starting inoculations.
So I have a question. You said when you're cutting the cap, do it when it's not fully extended. I kind of don't understand that.
Oh, yeah. So that's for the mushrooms. So when they first, let me see if I can find you a picture of them. When they first start to pop out, they kind of have a cupped lid, and then that top will start to, and eventually if you leave it go long enough, it'll become like completely flat across. And you want to harvest just when it's still a little bit cupped. Let's see if I have a picture for you.
So it's like you don't know when it's fully extended until it is, right?
Yeah, and after you look at them long enough, you'll start to kind of get an idea for them. I was going to try and find a picture. So here's a picture of when the best.
While you're looking, another thing was, oh shoot, I forget. How often do you inoculate? Like you said, the logs could last 4 to 6 years, but do you do it like every year on a couple logs just to keep it rotating?
So yeah, if you wanted a continual supply of mushrooms, you would want to inoculate a few more logs each year. And then, that would keep you with, you might have a lot of mushrooms at some point, or, whenever you stop inoculating logs, you'll have several years past that to go. But at our house, we usually do, I don't know, and I dehydrate and share with people, but we usually inoculate between 25 and 50 logs each year. So, and that helps me with like success with, if I have, because I do have some failures, like I have some logs that it just doesn't take. And then by the time I know it doesn't take, the log is kind of past that prime time to inoculate. So it usually just gets composted or used for campfire wood.
And also like the spawn, it has like a shelf life.
It does. So usually 6 to 9 months is the shelf life. And you want to make sure you keep it refrigerated because that slows down the process, like slows down it eating on the sawdust. And so it'll last longer. So, and it comes in like, I always joke, where I order from, it comes in like a plastic bag that seems to tear very easily. So I usually transfer it into a Ziploc bag just for ease. If that makes sense. So, and then I add moisture periodically. So, and Marsha, this is from just a super random like search of shiitake images. But this log over here, you can see it has some different mushrooms in different stages. So these that are still kind of curved at the end, those are the ones I'd want to harvest. This one, you can see it's actually slit and kind of fully extended. So that one's kind of past its prime, if you will, just meaning it's not going to last as long.
Okay, very good.
So, and you can freeze shiitake mushrooms as well, and then pull them out, defrost them, and prep them that way. I always get a lot of questions about what we use shiitakes for. So in Asian cuisine, they get used a lot of times in stir fries, so with noodles, and then some type of savory sauce with that. At our house, because we generally have a lot of them, I actually will sometimes cook them like I would a portobello. The flavoring's just a little bit different, but I'll grill them and then use them like a portobello sandwich. Instead, it's a shiitake sandwich. There's a company in Missouri, so they've been doing some like kind of freeze drying of shiitakes, and they call it a shiitake crutake. And so they kind of advertise it as a low carb crouton. So you could also, try out that. And then dehydration, of course, is great. You can add it to soups and stir fries later. And it takes up less storage space. So, and oysters are very similar. Oysters tend to have more of, in my opinion, more of a flavor like a button mushroom that you'd buy. So just kind of that like earthy mushroom flavor that you expect from like a button top or and they can be used again a lot of times in stir fries, sauteed with a little bit of butter and seasoning and served with noodles is a good way to eat them. But it's, as far as gardening goes, growing mushrooms is one of the easiest gardens to have. So after inoculation, it is pretty easy just to put them out there and make sure that they have water every so often, and then they do the rest. And they can last for quite some time. So, and again, if you know other people that are interested in mushrooms, so we know quite a few people that, especially like once they find out we were doing it, they're like, oh, I'd like a log or two. So we just kind of recruit them to all come over at one time. And we kind of form a assembly line, and a couple of people drill holes, a couple of people inoculate, a couple of people put the wax on, and then usually a couple of people that are kind of moving logs around, and then it goes a little bit faster. You get them all done at one time. So, and as far as spawn goes, it's very efficient. So 5 pounds of spawn usually inoculates between 25 and 35 logs, depending on the size. So that would use up a lot of the spawn all at one time. So I don't have to worry about storing.
So I'm looking at the website here just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get a kit that has like a tiny amount, which says 100 count. So does that mean?
So that is probably it. So they have, in addition to the sawdust, they have like thimbles and plugs. So you can it's drilling the same holes, but you just, instead of the sawdust, you'll push in like already inoculated like pieces of wood.
Oh, okay.
So, and those are actually good too. I should have included that because they have one called a thimble spawn, and it already has the waxy cover to it.
Ah,
Nice
okay.
sometimes.
Yeah, because if you get, it's if you get 100 of them, it's $19. And I thought, for a little kit, if you can get like 1,000, that'd be for you. But for me,
Yes.
yes,
Yep.
Even 100 seems like a lot, but
yeah. I've probably been asked this before. It depends on the size of the log, but for shiitakes, it's like you put holes every 6 inches and then kind of work your way around in a diamond pattern that are like 2 inches apart. So, I probably end up with, 20 or 30 holes that are filled on a log, which is what makes the sawdust spawn very cost effective. Any other questions today?
No, but thank you, Sarah. This has been very informative and I'm excited to try it out.
Oh, very good. Yes, I think it's a fun activity and a great use for if you have, logs that don't have another purpose. And then even after your mushrooms are done producing, you can still recycle your logs and use them in the fireplace. So
Excellent.
good. If you try it out, make sure you send me pictures.
I will. We'll do that.
That's all I have for today. Next week's presentation is about the tree farm system. So if you have seen on other folks' property or maybe on your own property, which would be awesome, there's sometimes this great big sign that says tree farmer. It's usually green and white. It's kind of a diamond pattern. We're going to talk about what that means and how people get into that that system and what are the benefits of being considered a tree farmer. So that will be next week's presentation. And then the last one of this month is learning about our MU labs. So we'll talk about the soils lab and the plant diagnostics lab and the resources that they provide for landowners. So yeah.
Hey, Sarah, is there a place we could get access to your PowerPoint to refer back to it?
Yeah, I can probably start sharing those in the emails. I usually send out the recording, but I could, definitely give out the PowerPoints as well.
Oh, super. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right. Well, I hope everyone has a good rest of the week, and I will see you again next Monday.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.